Hey guys, All in Crypto here, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another YouTube video. I hope you've all had a great start to your weekends. Today we're going to be diving into our daily cryptocurrency market update. We are predominantly going to be looking at the cryptocurrency market and really Bitcoin in this video. You guys know that we often venture out into the sort of broader financial landscape, as we know that finance as a whole, global finance, really impacts our market as we are a more mature and more tethered to space now that we have a bigger market cap and some of the institutional players that we have involved. So we're really going to take a look and start this video off by looking at the Fear and Greed Index. If you guys aren't already following me at Twitter, it's well worth it because I post multiple times a day things that I find interesting and things that you guys may find interesting and helpful. This is the Fear and Greed Index, and we are currently in extreme fear 10. This is actually lower than the kind of May sell-off that we saw, the bottom of the May sell-off. So we're going to be getting into a number of indicators. This, of course, is a chart that plots out the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index at the certain points in Bitcoin's price movement. And you can see where we are today and how this could be a bottoming signal. Often, you know, you want to do the opposite of what everybody else is doing. If everybody's fearful, and why is fear a good thing? Rather contradictory in the cryptocurrency market. Well, it creates shorts. What we often see with crypto, and we know that when we look at sell-offs, there's often a lot of leverage behind it. Certainly this one and this one over here, nearly $1 billion worth of liquidations got long liquidation positions got liquidated. What we want is we want a lot of shorts to get liquidated because that essentially is the breeding ground for explosive price movement to the upside. And I think we could be on the verge of that. There's also a pattern playing out with Bitcoin that we're going to get into. We're going to look at three indicators, the RSI, the stock RSI, and the MACD on Bitcoin, and why they're all at a very low point, suggesting and kind of confirming that we are probably going to see some continuation, or if nothing else, a relief rally sometime soon. We'll be looking at ADA, Ethereum, of course, just diving into one article here talking about PayPal and how they're exploring creating their own stablecoin. Despite the market action, guys, large companies, countries around the world are still moving towards blockchain adoption. And that's what you need to bear in mind throughout these sort of periods of volatility. And like I say, 10 extreme fear, I'm not in this category. I've never been so bullish on crypto. I'm sure you guys get kind of tired of me telling you that. So let's start with this indicator here. This is the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index. Wow, Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index has just dropped to 10. Rarely do we see the score drop so far down in extreme fear. And this is from Philip Swift. I reposted this on my Twitter, and this is essentially mapping out and really showing you some key points of when the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index has been so low, and how this has kind of signaled a bottom. And there's a potential for that. We also have this indicator over here. Update on Bitcoin paper hands ratio of young coins active in the last 6 months / circulating supply. How to read. 49% peak retail FOMO, 25% Bitcoin in dead zone, lowest since 2015, bear market, bullish bottom signal. And you can see we are there today, ladies and gentlemen. We're kind of right at the floor of this indicator that is typically signaled when a trend reversal is coming. This is another one that we spoke about in great detail. We tied this in with this kind of rising reg or channel, whichever you want to call it, kindred to this one. Where the same thing happened with the supply. A liquid supply actually crossed over Bitcoin's price. And you can see that has indeed happened today. And we are expecting continuation. This is from Bitcoin Archive, somebody that we highly recommend following. And essentially, you know, this typically price will catch up with the illiquid supply. And what's essentially happening here is every time there's a dip, every time Bitcoin pulls back, you see somebody buy it up. And typically it's people that already own a lot of Bitcoin. Essentially, people are getting shaken out. This is from Laura Sin. Now, we did talk about this the other day, and this really maps out cycles. You guys know that we've done a lot of mapping out on cycles. We've spoken in great detail about the 4-year cycle theory, why there's fundamental reasons why we're going to move away from such a tethered motion attached with the halvening, which causes the Bitcoin 4-year cycle theory, to more of an adoption curve. And this is interesting. And we do look, if you look at what took place in 2013, you can see that you had your run-up, you had a rest like we're currently having today before you saw that next leg of continuation. I do expect something like that to take place. I do think cycles are lengthening and so on and so forth. So there are a couple of indicators that I think are very interesting. The Fear and Greed Index one is certainly interesting. This one is also interesting. Of course, liquid supply is always interesting to pay attention to. And this is another thing that we also spoke about from Will Clement, another fantastic Bitcoin, really Bitcoin focused analyzer. And this is talking about Asia sell pressure. We've said that China have a great involvement, certainly in May when they banned Bitcoin mining. We've seen the hash power return to the Bitcoin network and has actually gone on to make new all-time highs in a more decentralized fashion. So it's a very bullish thing for the fundamental reasons of Bitcoin, even though the price did this. And now we're seeing, or certainly seen, given this indicator, that when China came out and said that they were going to ban their citizens interacting with cryptocurrency exchanges, obviously they became forced sellers in the same way the miners did. And we're seeing that sell pressure. I mean, look at this sell pressure from Asia. For the first time, we're seeing that actually turn into a little bit of buy pressure and kind of overwhelm the sell pressure, because I think they had a time period where sort of the end of the year was the cutoff. So let's get into Bitcoin. I'm going to try and keep this video short and sweet, guys, but you know how I do. I often like to ramble on, not ramble on, but kind of diverge into different topics that are related to what we're talking about. This is Bitcoin, and this is what we have set up for it. We said that it's very a kindred what took place over in March 2020 and what happened here. And you're setting up similar structure, this kind of ascending wedge, if you will, that I think you're going to break to the upside of. Now, you have broken to the downside. Great thing about TA is you can just move the lines. No, I'm joking. But you could still be setting up something like this, guys. And there's a number of indicators. I mean, these all are typically what look like bottoming indicators for various different reasons. But what I think potentially could be in play, and I'll actually remove this for the time being. We're going to take a look at the RSI, the stock RSI, and the MACD in just a second. This is very interesting to me because you're setting up. What should we use here? We'll use this. You're setting up very interesting structure. What we'll do is we'll make this. What color shall we go for? We'll go for green. Light green will probably do the trick. Can you see how this was? And we spoke about this head and shoulders yesterday. Lots of people were looking at this and calling for head and shoulders. And essentially the opposite happened. And this was the sort of bottoming signal after you had this sort of wick down. Very similar thing taking place today, ladies and gentlemen. So can you see that? How you have this kind of head and shoulders pattern. It's not the most nicely drawn, but I'm doing it just for the sake of this video. You can see that if you look at what essentially took place over here, you came down and you had this wick, and then you came up and you followed down, and just coming below that wick and putting in a slightly lower low actually confirmed from the wick that was then indeed the bottom, and we saw an explosion to the upside. Why might there be impulsive moves to the upside? Well, we're at a pretty record, we're at extreme fear. People start shorting this market with leverage in the same way that people long the market and get wiped out, and that causes a cascade of long liquidations, which pushes to the downside. The shorting liquidations they become forced buyers essentially, and that's what I'm really hoping for. And it's when everyone's bearish that you don't want to take your eye off the ball. And if you look at where we are today, similar structure over here, guys. Can you see this? We come down. This is your neckline in the same way that this really was here, signaled by this wick. So some key points to look at is over here and over here. The kind of armpits, if you will. Armpit 1, armpit 2. Same thing setting up today, ladies and gentlemen. Now, it's a potential play. It doesn't have to play out. Just because something's played out once doesn't mean it's going to play out again. But there's a number of fundamental reasons why we think potentially the bottom is very close. There is still the possibility for more downside. Let's not elude anyone from that. Certainly when markets are in extreme fear, retail sort of hesitant to get in and need that kind of spark to be ignited again. So it's certainly something, now that must, I know this doesn't look like pretty TA, but you can see essentially what I'm talking about here. And then you get that continuation. And you're in a similar spot today, ladies and gentlemen. Come down, and then we look for that continuation. And this would also kind of tie in with what we think potentially is playing out on a kind of macro scale, where you're kind of in here, and we now see that return move to the upside. So let's look at some of the indicators. I typically won't look at the RSI or the stock RSI or the MACD on anything other than the weekly time frame. I just think if you go down into those smaller time brackets or time frames, they're not really too much use unless you're sort of micro trading or scalping. So one thing I want to highlight is you're pretty much at the same position, confirming what we've just spoke about with these two structures at play, that you also were back here in July. So essentially at the bottom here in July, your RSI is at a very similar place. Also, your stock RSI is at pretty much the exact place. Is the possibility there that we come over and do some sort of a double bottom before we see the continuation? Absolutely. But if you look again, your July bottom, where we currently are today. Now, there's a little bit of room for downside, but we've already seen that kind of first bounce. Second one potentially coming. Take a look at the MACD. We're getting very close, ladies and gentlemen. And you can see we've had kind of quite a rest period given where we are today. Things have kind of reset from what typically may have been a kind of overhyped market. So there's a number of indicators on there. The thing is with these indicators is these indicators weren't made for the crypto market. They were made for the traditional stock market. So they have in my opinion, less of a... they're less... reliant, I think, in the crypto market, but they still have a place, and you can see they're just another sort of piece of the puzzle, given what we've all just looked at in this video. Cardano, well, Cardano's seeing some huge strength around here, guys. And ultimately, you guys know how bullish I am on ADA with this turning on of the smart contracts that happened in September. We're now starting to see the fruits of that, and we're going to start to see dApps launching. We're already seeing ADA and total value get locked into Cardano's DeFi with one relatively unknown DEX that kind of surprised everyone. There's going to be a cascade of that, and I think there's a hugely bullish reason fundamentally and technically to be bullish on Cardano. I just think it gets thrown around a little bit with the market, but potentially, and we looked at Cardano against Bitcoin and Ethereum, is going to start to make some headway. And there's fundamental, we're not just pulling this out of a hat, fundamental reasons for why we think that is in play. Ethereum's done absolutely amazingly, by the way, guys, since the March 2020 sell-off. I am in a bit of a tricky situation with Ethereum. Because I'm not impressed. I don't use Ethereum at all. I don't even like sending my Ethereum around just because I hate the gas fees when there's other chains out there that you can send far cheaply and higher throughput, and they're far faster. Cardano being one. ETH2 is still very uncertain of even a rough timeline. Vitalik came on the Bankless podcast, said they're like halfway through. He's also made a statement the other day saying that he doesn't agree with multi-chain, cross-chain, which is the very reason I think him and Gavin Wood fell out, and Gavin went on to find POLKADOT. So I have some real issues. I think it is kind of where the big money is in terms of VCs and your kind of institutions in terms of the smart contract game. Reason being is they won't put it on something like Solana that kind of malfunctions all the time. They won't throw millions on there because it's too much of a risk, whereas they'll go for something that's had the most uptime, which is Ethereum. So it's still the safest bet for institutions at the moment. That is going to change, I think, over time. And unless they start to crack down on ETH2, for the first time in a long time, I'm considering selling my Ethereum and maybe moving it into something like Cardano. Even though I'm a big Cardano ambassador, I still hold all my Ethereum. I hold a lot of Ethereum and have accumulated it, at a very cheap price. But I'm seriously considering swapping it into another chain that I think is going to seriously outperform and has far more scope to grow. That being said, if ETH2 does roll out, I will be, and I'm still very bullish on it. It's just when it rolls out, and there's no sort of certainty about that, and so on and so forth. Just a quick article from PayPal. PayPal is exploring creating its own stablecoin and crypto business as crypto business grows. This is all companies are essentially going to go to where they can make money, and crypto is that new thing on the block. Certainly with a ever getting younger generation, ever getting younger population that is internet native. This is something all companies are going to move towards in the same way that companies really had to adapt and start to onboard themselves onto the internet. Same thing's happening with blockchain and so on and so forth. The dollar got slammed down, which is why potentially we saw a little bit of strength with Bitcoin, but we'll see what happens at the end of the day. So that's really all I have for you in this video. Just a short and sweet update covering a few bases. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, a like is always appreciated. So it's a comment. And I look forward to seeing each and every one of you in the next YouTube video. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gents.